attendees coming in.
Okay, look at that. Wow, we already have 6 attendees as soon as we opened it up. Some nice early birds. Hi, I'm Becca White. I'm a community engagement manager with Efficiency Vermont, and we're just letting folks trickle in to our exciting, tried and true historic homes and practices around weatherization with Alex from the Preservation Trust of Vermont. And I'm going to pull up a presentation to go over a few things as we start to have you filter in. So here we go. And of course, I got to click from beginning. There we go. So you should be seeing the list of, or let's see, actually, I got to switch to swap presenter view. Right now, you should be seeing a nice view of logos. These are all the folks that are supporting on the utility side for Button Up Vermont. We want to thank them. We've got tons of fabulous nonprofits that support Button Up this year. You can even see Preservation Trust down at the bottom. Then we've got all of the community action agencies in the state. If you know yours, definitely think about giving them a shout out at some point if you're thinking about income eligible weatherization. And then the regional planning commissions, woohoo. We are gonna spend a little bit of time while people are still trickling in, and I wanted to mention some exciting things that are coming up. The first is we have a list of events that you can check out, including all the Weatherization Wednesdays, the regional webinars, and on top of that, we've got some DIY tips. You can watch videos, all that good stuff, and a link to the newsletter. We're gonna put that in the chat. If you're watching this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I know exactly who would love to learn about weatherizing their home or buttoning up generally, or even just this specific topic around weatherizing historic homes or the tools that we use historically to keep our homes buttoned up, why don't you start drafting an email right now? I mean, just type in a little subject line, button up, think about those friends who you want to share the exciting news of the button up season with. That's really what I wanted to highlight as we start to get going. And before I move on, I know that we're going live on Facebook. I just wanted to mention one other piece, which is that today we have an exciting giveaway. So if you're watching this and you weren't already jazzed to just watch, you could also win something. We have a book, The Gathering Place by Peter Miller, which the Preservation Trust of Vermont has kindly offered to give away to a special commenter today. So if you're watching on Facebook Live or you've registered and you're on the Zoom, you will have a chance at the end to answer a question to win the book. And I actually see we have a poll that popped up with, if you're on the Zoom, you'll see it. How did you hear about this event? So take a chance to answer that too. But yeah, Daniel, I'm happy to pass it off. I'm so excited.
Thanks, Becca. Thanks everybody for coming to our Weatherization Wednesdays. A reminder that this is happening every Wednesday at noon. So hop on over to buttonupvermont.org to check out other events, register for upcoming webinars, or find us on Facebook Live, join us there. We're trying to cover a new topic on weatherization every Wednesday with the goal of just making sure that you've got what you need to button up your home, use less energy, pay less for heating and cooling in the summer, and overall as an effort to get closer to our state emissions goals. So thanks for being here. Really been looking forward to talking with Alex about what we're thinking about with historic buildings, with historic homes when it comes to weatherization, and how to maintain the character of the building that we love, and the historic characters without also sacrificing, drafts and comfort and affordable heating solutions. If you came because you're interested in this, I assume that's why you're here. You might also really want to check out the Weatherization Wednesday on November 4th. We don't have the details up on the website yet, but we're going to talk about a full retrofit of a 1800s farmhouse that is on the way, or maybe already there, to using net zero energy. So check that out later too. And without further ado, I wanted to again thank you so much, Alex, for joining us today. And I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your organization, Preservation Trust, and the role you're playing in Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Becca, for having me. PTV is honored to be part of Button Up Vermont, and all these partners that you listed are really doing great work throughout the state. So first, I just want to say thank you broadly just to Button Up Vermont. The Preservation Trust of Vermont is a statewide nonprofit that works to preserve buildings and community throughout the state. I like to think probably 20% of what we do is strict preservation of, saving old buildings. The rest, really, it's community development and helping communities, building owners, homeowners find out how to preserve their buildings, preserve their, again, community and everything like that. So we offer technical assistance. We work with churches, libraries, municipal buildings, schools, a lot of general stores, all types of different buildings and groups to try to find funding and everything like that. So if you want to learn more about what we do, please visit ptvermont.org.
Thanks, Alex. So I was hoping that you could get into talking about, when we're thinking about making a historic home more comfortable, cutting down on our heating costs, what are some of the things we want to think about that we could actually do? And also, what are the things that have, or maybe already inherent in that building, in general philosophies of from your organization and thinking about homes of this nature and weatherization?
Yeah, it's a great question. Preservation philosophy is kind of something that we're always trying to kind of keep in the back of our minds whenever we're working through these whenever we're attempting to work on a historic building. So what do I mean by philosophy? There's certain things like we want to think about the character defining features of a building. What are the parts of your building, your home, that place it within a historic or architectural context? And this can be the gingerbread moldings on the roof eaves, or the Greek revival entablature over the front door, whatever it is. Not only does it add to the sense of style and the architectural characteristics of the building, but it also lets us know how the building was built. And when we know how the building was built, we have a better way of knowing what tools we should use to upgrade it for energy consumption. So like if it's balloon framed, if it's stick framed, if it's masonry, all these different things help us learn to move forward. Another big thing for preservation philosophy is reversibility. We want to remember that these buildings were here for a long time before us, and hopefully they'll be here for a long time after us. So we want to make sure that what we're doing to these buildings is reversible. And so that means, not harming historic materials, replacing materials in kind. So, wood with wood, or, the same bricks with, replacing in kind, things like that. And then also we need to remember that the historic buildings require maintenance. They require constant upkeep. And I know if you own a historic building, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But a well-maintained building is going to be the most efficient building. Keep your windows glazed, keep your trim painted and caulked and sealed. Little things like that are pretty big. And that's kind of the broad things when we think about when we say preservation philosophy.
When you say keep your windows glazed, what's that process like?
What's that process? So if you have,
I haven't ever done that.
yeah, I mean, glazing windows used to be a pretty common homeowner task. So, you know, you have your wood window frame with the individual sashes, and what's keeping those sashes in place is this flexible putty called window glazing. And you'll see it kind of chip off sometimes or crack, and sometimes you can kind of just go in with window glazing, which you can get at any hardware store. And there's millions of videos online of how to reglaze your windows, and just kind of spot glaze, or you might need to pop the sash out and rework the whole thing. Again, if you are looking for more information on that, contact me, Google window reglazing. There's tons of information online.
So I want to get into a little bit later some of the more specific examples of reversibility and what kind of weatherization tactics we might want to use, strategies we want to use on a historic home or prioritize on a historic home. But I know you've got some photos to show us first, because we know, as you were mentioning, there's steps that we want to take with historic buildings, but also there's a lot that people thought about with passive heating and cooling and other things about where you're going to build your house in the first place that are already kind of ingenious ways of keeping a home warm or cool, and also a great reason to maintain that home as it is rather than dramatically changing it. So hoping you can talk us through a little bit of that.
Sure. So I wanted to use a pretty important building to the state of Vermont. This is in Plymouth Notch. And so when we're thinking about old buildings and how they're inherently energy efficient, we need to remember that, you know, the amount of work and effort that went into keeping these historic buildings heated throughout the winter was pretty ridiculous amount of work. Some estimates say that a colonial farmhouse went through about 40 cords of wood a year. So if you can, any way you can kind of limit your energy consumption, I think they would have probably done it. So when we're looking at old buildings such as this in Plymouth Notch, we can kind of see all the different things throughout the year that were used to increase energy efficiency. And we think of them maybe just as, you know, character defining features, but they're also energy efficient features. So just looking through this, you know, right now we're looking at porches, we're looking at shade trees, we're looking at the shutters, the windows, the bay window to allow light into the building, to warm it, to allow more light into the building throughout the winter. These are all inherent features of historic buildings that are energy efficient. Becca, if you want to maybe go to the next slide. Yeah, so porches, much more common probably in the South, but they're absolutely common up here. When you've got a wood stove going throughout the year, it's going to get hot in the summer, and porches allow for more air circulation. They also block the summer sun when it's high from entering the interior of the building. Probably if you have a porch, you might notice that if it's on the south, during the winter, a lot of porches were kind of designed to allow that lower winter sun to then penetrate into the interior. Roof overhangs, soffits. This is another, really common way of blocking the hot summer sun and then allowing the sun in the winter to enter the building. We're also seeing this shade tree, which you'll notice a lot of old farmhouses have a giant shade tree right in the front. Another really great way, this is a cedar tree, but a lot of times it's a maple. So in the summer, when leaves are out, it's blocking the hot summer sun. And then in the winter, when the leaves are gone, it's allowing the sun to again hit the building and warm it up. Another really ingenious way of maximizing solar gain. Um,
And
okay.
I'll try not to change my profile picture halfway through again.
No problem, no problem.
Oh, goodness. Here we go. Next slide.
Yeah, so shutters. Shutters are really ingenious way of blocking harsh wind and rain, wind-driven rain from hitting your window. First, not only deteriorating the window, but also blocking that wind-driven rain and cold winter air. But during the day, they can be opened up to allow the sun to hit the windows and hit the interior of the room. You know, when we're looking at pictures of, you know, hurricanes, people are boarding up their windows. This is exactly what they were doing, only it's way easier to just kind of open it and shut it as needed. And during the summer, in the middle of the hot summer day, you can close them and you can have shade, but it's still allowing for air circulation. You can always tell original shutters because when they're open, they're facing down, and when they're closed, you want the wind to be rolling down. So if they're kind of reverse, like right now they're facing up, they should be, that's the original way. I also want to take this time to kind of point out that windows, these historic windows, have so many different features that make them energy efficient. You know, we think of a lock on the center of the meeting rails on the double hung window just for security, but really what it's doing is it's making a tighter bond between the meeting rails of the upper sash and the lower sash so that they really hit and form a tight seal. That's probably one of the biggest areas where wind can and drafts can come in through a double hung window. We also, on the sides of the windows, we have something called window stops. And a lot of houses you'll see there's screws with washers. These window stops were made so that in the summer when, you know, the sashes are swollen, you can move them out and the window sashes can move up and down freely. In the winter, you push those stops in to, again, push that sash up against the window stops, again, forming a tight seal. Really ingenious way of, you know, changing your needs throughout the year, depending on what, you know, whether or not you want the window open. I also want to say storm windows are an incredible way of reducing drafts for exterior windows. Whether it's an exterior storm window or an interior window. I've done a lot of research on a well-fitting exterior storm window with a well-maintained original window is as efficient as a new double pane window from, you know, any modern window maker. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about replacing your old windows.
And Alex, just a quick note, I love the things you're pointing out. And one piece that was interesting as we were preparing for today is the fact that I didn't even know I had these features in my home. And it wasn't until I started to look and actually see, oh, wait, there is a way that I could pop out the sides of my windows. So what I'm intrigued by is you might not think you have these in your home because, like for us, it was painted over. So that's so cool.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of those window stops have been, like you said, have been painted over and are not movable anymore. So think about maybe taking a knife out and cutting that paint line and moving those window stops in and out. Give it a try. I also want to say my grandmother would be remiss if I didn't mention it. Window snakes, those, you know, tubes full of sand that every grandmother, I feel like, put next to their windows, they work well. And as much as I made fun of her for them, the second I got an old house, I asked her to make me some. So don't count out the tried and true methods like window snakes. Yeah, this is another great photo that shows, well, maybe not the best photo, but this is another really good example of how the old timers maximize their heat just through the layout of their building. So this is a door at the bottom of stairs that lead to the second floor. So in the middle of the summer or winter day, you could close this door and all the heat would stay down in your living area. And then maybe towards night, you'd open the door up and all the heat would then go up into the bedrooms. Again, kind of maximizing and making the building work for you and your living patterns. There's lots of examples of this in older buildings. So, when we think about the kind of traditional New England salt box, its rooms all centered around this massive chimney in the center. That massive chimney was a thermal mass that kind of held that warm air throughout the day. And then throughout the night, it would kind of disperse that heat into the rooms around it. It's another great way that old timers maximize layout and doors and windows to control their energy consumption.
That's great, Alex. Thank you so much for walking us through that. In our chat, if you're on the Zoom, just try to put in a couple notes as you were talking, for things that you could do at home if you've got windows or other elements like these in your home. So I'll read those out for folks who are on Facebook and not seeing our chat. There's adjusting the window stops and keeping in mind they might be painted over, so possibly cutting that paint line so you can free them up to move. Am I right that you're saying there's some screws probably somewhere on that sheathing that allow you to make it tighter or looser, right?
Yeah, and if you look up a diagram of an old historic window, they'll kind of lay out all these different parts of a historic window that I'm talking about. But window stops are up against the jamb. And they look like just a little piece of trim, and they might have those little washers and screws.
Great. Also making sure that those locks work really well to tighten the sashes together. I know that, again, like if you're missing a lock or it's broken for some reason, you can go grab that from a hardware store easily. Adding storm windows to the exterior. If you bought a house that doesn't have, because I know a lot of those were original with the house, but maybe they never existed, or maybe there aren't any remaining. What would you recommend for people to do if they don't have storm windows right now?
Sure. If you don't have storm windows right now, there's lots of different options for getting storm windows. You can get the common triple track aluminum storm windows, or you can also get really nice custom wood storm windows that work really, really well. If you put a little gasket on the inside, again, they're going to be incredibly energy efficient, and you can contact kind of any window maker can do them. There's also lots of guides online to make them yourselves. Interior storm windows are also a really easy way to kind of stop that draft. And again, there's lots of different ways online. Yeah, window dressers, I'm seeing that come up in the chat. That's kind of the simplest way to kind of stop drafts from coming in. You can also go out and buy some acrylic and some magnetic tape, and pretty quickly you can create interior storm windows.
Wow.
Great. And we're gonna, later on in our Weatherization Wednesdays and button-up programming, we're gonna have some work specifically with window dressers, if you want to catch up on that. And then the last thing I put in is the window snakes. And I don't know if your grandmother's putting patterns online, but some certainly is, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there's examples online to make window snakes. Yeah.
We've also got Matt Sargent with us, energy efficiency expert from Efficiency Vermont, to answer any other technical questions that the three of us may not be able to field. He's been throwing in some comments in the chat as well, as we've been going through, just pointing out that, having heavy drapes or some other covering on the inside of the window can be, in addition to privacy, also really good for sealing, blocking heat, blocking drafts. Somebody else shared as well that you could even think about hanging that in a doorway if you don't have a door, or you used to have a door and you don't anymore. So that could be also something that could be really effective at blocking, particularly as what we're thinking about, like sectioning the house into different zones by closing off that stairwell in a way that you can still easily like pass right through. Just like all the restaurants that have that little drape area right where you walk in the door to keep the drafts out. If people have questions, feel free to, on Zoom, put them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. Same if you're on Facebook Live, put questions in the comments and we'll do our best to get you answers. Alex, I wanted to get back to that reversibility concept. If I owned a historic building and I was going to talk with a contractor about how to maybe do a bigger weatherization project, insulation in the walls or attic, work in the basement to really do some air sealing and make the whole thing tighter and warmer. What are some of the things I want to be considering when I'm talking to a contractor about this?
Sure, great question. You know, I think a lot of times when people jump into these weatherization projects, especially with old homes, it's kind of, they jump in with both feet and they want to, you know, insulate the walls, insulate the, you know, remove the windows, put in brand new this and that. I think it's important that you don't have to do it all at once. You know, you can kind of go in and do the easy, the kind of low hanging fruit, you know, touching up your windows, insulating your attic and the crawl spaces or basements. That's where you're getting most of your heat loss. And that's something as simple as, you know, blowing in cellulose. That's completely reversible. You know, so it may make a mess, but you can easily take out the cellulose and do something else. If you're going to hire a contractor to insulate your walls, insulating the walls in historic buildings can be done, but it's difficult. And there's not really a perfect all-encompassing way of insulating your walls. So I would think twice about it. And if you're serious about it, I'd make sure that your contractor knows how your building breathes. You know, how does moisture that inevitably gets inside your wall cavities or inside your building, how does it leave? We need to think about that so we're not trapping moisture within our wall cavities. This is a much bigger topic that we could spend another whole hour on. And Matt Sargent is a great resource on insulating walls and things like that. But, you know, just before you cover everything in spray foam or, you know, everything like that, just think about the long-term effects of spray foam and whether or not it can be removed. It's probably pretty difficult. So just kind of keep these things in the back of your minds, tackle those low-hanging fruit, grab those low-hanging fruit first, and then, you know, if you're still not happy about your energy consumption, then contact experts in the field about moving forward.
I love the phrase you just used, a question of asking, how does your building breathe? That is such a good visual for me because it's exactly true. Air incoming, air outgoing. How do you make sure that you encompass health and safety? So thanks for that phrase. We have a few questions that are popping up in the Q&A that I wanted to ask. And I think it gets right to what you were starting to notice, which is these could be big topics. So if let's say someone wanted more resources, like a book or a website on making a historic home more efficient, where would you send them?
Yeah, first, you know, feel free to contact PTV. You know, we're here ready to answer technical questions. The Division for Historic Preservation, Vermont is incredibly lucky to have a division that is so willing to answer questions. Not every state has that. So the Division for Historic Preservation is a tremendous resource. Efficiency Vermont is also a great resource. And the chat bar at the very top, I put in the National Park Service has a preservation brief called, it's the number 3, on energy upgrades for historic buildings. And they've got a lot of great information, and then their links and resources down the bottom, another great area to kind of go and dig deeper into some of these questions.
Nice. And kind of a little bit off of that question, we also got a question around how do you find someone who can do an energy audit who either specializes in or has a good understanding of historic homes? There might not be one specific person you would recommend, but what would you give advice on for someone trying to get that initial energy audit?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not going to make specific recommendations, but there are, PTV and the division are working constantly with people that do perform energy audits on trying to explain the risks of working with historic buildings, and that, what might work for a 90s, 2000s building probably doesn't work for a 1820s brick farmhouse. And just understanding that and some of those risks. So again, I'd ask them questions like, do you understand how this building breathes?
There we go.
What if I put spray foam in the walls, where will moisture condensate and how can it escape? We have to remember that, again, these buildings were going through an extraordinary amount of wood throughout the year. And that's a lot of drying capacity. When you're burning that much cordwood in a wood stove, now that we take that out and now we're using other methods of heat and we're buttoning up our buildings tighter and tighter, there's some risks involved with that. And I just think we need to keep that in mind. So asking the right questions, I think, is key.
Nice. And I see we've got also a detailed question, and I think you kind of hit on some of the philosophy piece of it. But we have Ron who's asking that they were told that they could keep their windows partially open in their attic year-round to allow heat to escape to avoid condensation. So I think really getting to what you were just talking about. And there's a concern around all of the blown-in insulation, for example. Is that a good idea with their older home? A little concern there, and it might be worth to pull Matt up to respond to that. I see you may have popped up, or Alex, if you've got a take too.
Yeah, I'll let Matt speak to the technical parts, but again, a lot of older buildings had soffit vents and gable vents and things like that to allow that air to move through and to allow for air circulation. And air circulation can be a good thing in the right places. Matt, I'd love to get your specific technical advice on this.
Sure. Yeah, I did want to chime in here. So a lot of these old buildings are still standing because they have so much air moving through them. So they're made of wood, and wood can get wet and dry out and get wet and dry out an infinite number of times. When wood gets wet and stays wet and still has access to oxygen, that's when it's going to start to rot. So when we're looking at an old building and we're talking about should we insulate it or not, should we blow cellulose in those exterior wall cavities, we have to decide, well, is this, what's the wetting potential and what's the drying potential? So has the building been recladded? Is there tar paper behind those shingles, behind those clapboards? Are we going to be able to keep water out of these cavities? If so, sure. Cellulose is actually a very resilient material. It has a great capacity to absorb moisture and release moisture when drying conditions permit. So picture your building closed up, and in the wintertime, that cellulose is absorbing some moisture from the interior humidity. And then in the summertime, the sun hits the walls and pushes that moisture back out. So it has a pretty nice ability to act as sort of a moisture flywheel, but we can't have excess moisture. We can't have bad flashing details or like no tar paper between the clapboards and the sheathing. We can't have wet basements, that kind of thing, if we're going to do some of this insulating and tightening things up. So the air moving through it does keep it dry and does help it last. But lots of times we have way more drying potential than we have wetting potential. We have a fairly dry building already, and we don't need all that drying potential. And it's okay to tighten them up. But I think somebody else brought up the point, ask your contractor, hey, do you know how this thing breathes? Do you know where it gets its moisture from and how it gets rid of it? Is probably a more specific way to ask that question. You know, keeping the windows open is sort of like the opposite of buttoning up. So, you know, there's a balance, right? So how much air do we need to let move through this house, and how much can we stop it? Those are, just wanted to chime in there and give some background on that.
Great points, Matt. It's so good to have both of you on here, because I think when we think about weatherization, we don't always think about the philosophical side of things, of like the value of what you're doing, and then the technical, how do you make that a reality by balancing all of the different concerns that might come from a home built at kind of any period of time. I know we're actually over 12:30. Normally we try to do this in a half an hour, but you folks are asking such good questions. I'm happy to run through. We've got two that I think would be worthwhile to posit to both of you, but did want to note, since we're over 12:30, if you're realizing, oh, time check, gotta go, we'll keep answering questions, but thank you for joining.
Recorded, and so you can always get in touch with us to get a link to the video later, or find it on our Facebook page. You'll be able to see it there. So if you've got to bounce, you can come check out the rest later.
So I did want to note, we have a question from someone who's asking, you know, we had our house painted last year and the painter insisted on not caulking to keep, to help with moisture. So there are gaps under some of the boards. Should they seal them up? And, you know, kind of to what you were just saying, Matt, maybe there's someone we might recommend, or a place for resources, they might be able to get a good answer on that.
The question is to caulk underneath like clapboards? That's
a good question. It seems like they had their house painted and it's gaps under every board.
I mean, so sometimes, yeah, you want ways for moisture to escape if it were to get into your wall cavities. And that's why you do never kind of caulk that gap underneath clapboard. And that could be what your contractor was talking about. Matt, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've seen people actually put little shims between the clapboards to allow for better drying. And that seems to help hold paint better. I mean, when we build now, it's very common to put a rain screen or introduce a gap behind the clapboards, between the clapboards and the wall. That helps keep the clapboards, keeps the paint on them. They last much longer. There's a drying space behind them. So those gaps are important. I guess the rule of thumb is you seal the vertical gaps and you leave the horizontal ones up.
Huh. Oh, I'm learning something new. Wow. And then we've actually got a question. I'll take a shot at answering this one first and then posit it to the group. But we have Cheryl in the comments who asked, you know, all the tax incentives, for example, and programs prioritize cellulose or spray foam. And she has a question about how many old buildings have old wiring. And she also lists like squirrels and bats, which I think we all know is very true. And instant insulation could actually be a fire hazard for those older homes. So I think that's a really good question, Cheryl. And I'll just start by saying we do have a product called the Home Energy Loan, which if you're thinking about doing a project for weatherization, you can actually do some of those health and safety improvements. Up to 50% of the home energy loan can be used for those improvements. So I just want to start there with that expectation. If someone is pursuing a project, they can pursue health and safety improvements on an older home like those. But yeah, what would you say to someone who's thinking about insulating a home, trying to understand the incentives, but also worried about safety?
Yeah, I think that, it is a big concern. I always think of knob and tube wiring is a pretty safe wiring if you really think about it, in that, your two wires, your positive and your negative, are pretty far apart as opposed to modern Romex where they're right next to each other. But they only work if they're intact and they have area around them to let the heat dissipate, because they're not insulated. And when you add insulation, again, this is probably something Matt can speak to. in more detail. But when you add insulation around it and you remove that ability for the heat to dissipate, you can come into some life safety issues. Again, I think it's just a question of asking questions before you get into a situation with a contractor. Like, do you know what's inside these walls before you fill them full of spray foam or cellulose? My building is still knob and tube wiring. What does that mean? What can and what can't I do because of that? Again, it's a great question to ask.
Totally. And we've actually got another question, which similar, very specific questions being asked here. So if you do have something specific to your home, again, just calling out, we've got resources with Alex at the Preservation Trust, and then you're always welcome to call Efficiency Vermont, and we can provide resources as well. So Elena asks, the original exterior walls of my home, built in 1899, woo, they were covered with insulation and covered with cement board siding, which was put on sometime in the late 90s. Does it make sense to remove it or keep it in place? The tricky questions, right?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. Yeah, I think siding can absolutely be a character defining feature on some buildings. And we have to think about what's underneath that that cement board siding. I think a lot of times, a lot of these kind of things that are thought of as cure all, end all be all, fix all the problems, like vinyl or aluminum siding, and now cement siding, they're put right on top of the original wood siding, and now it could be trapping moisture behind it and not allowing that siding to dry. And then, that moisture kind of can move around inside the wall cavity. Not knowing specifics, it's difficult for me to say. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, the obvious answer is it depends. It really does depend on a number of things. And I think Alex is spot on. Like, it's what's behind that siding is more important than what the siding is in terms of how it's preserving the building. I've seen many old buildings wrapped with vinyl siding, and vinyl siding I don't like it, and it doesn't really look good, but it's preserving that building for later, to a point where somebody can actually get in there and do the work that needs to be done. As a stopgap measure, I've seen it work. I've seen 40-year-old vinyl siding be pulled off an old building, and the old building is like in pretty good shape underneath it, except for the scraping and painting that they wanted to stop doing. So it really depends on what's under it, what the flashing details are like, what the water resistant barrier is. So cladding, siding is just cladding, right? It's just stuff to keep the bulk of the water off, but water gets behind it, and we need a water resistant barrier behind it. Tar paper is the common one that was used in old buildings. There's more modern versions now, but tar paper is great stuff. Does it have tar paper? You don't know until you start pulling things off. So yeah, it depends.
Wow.
These are great. Thank you both. I wonder if we listed a number of things that people could go out and check right now, check tonight, check this weekend, and work on. I'm wondering if there's anything else you all have in mind for historic homeowners out there that they could tackle, in a day on themselves. We have a great list of DIY projects on buttonupvermont.org, like sealing up, insulating your attic hatch. There's plenty of other things on the website that you could look at with that eye for what's reversible, what's not permanent, and also thinking about the trade-offs of what maintains the historic nature of this home and keeps something that I want to live in forever, and that we'll want to maintain around as a structure forever, rather than knocking something down and rebuilding it because it's no longer loved. So a great reason to keep it in something that people really love to be in. So I'm curious what other ideas you all have that people should be thinking about now.
Sure. Matt, do you want to go first?
Doesn't matter. I had something I wanted to say. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Okay. So I was in a house the other day, and they were complaining about how uncomfortable their windows were, and how they had the wind blowing through the curtains all winter long. And it turned out that the sash locks weren't aligned properly on a lot of the windows. So I would say that sash lock that you mentioned, it's not so much to keep burglars out, but it's really there to pull the two pieces of windows together, meeting rail. So before you turn on your heat this year, go around and make sure all your windows are locked tight and that the meeting rails are pulled together tight with those sash locks. That's one thing you can do. It shouldn't take long, and just do it every year before you turn on your heating system.
Yeah, I mean, a telltale way of knowing if your meeting rails aren't tight is in the winter when you get the condensation at the bottom of the upper sash. That's, that cold air coming in between those meeting rails and freezing. That's a sign that it's not a well-formed seal at that meeting rail. I would say weather stripping doors and windows is a pretty simple and pretty cost-effective way of reducing drafts around doors and windows. It's something you can get, again, these are things that you can get at any single hardware store, and will probably have a pretty instant effect on your energy consumption, or at least the comfort of your home. I also just want to say, what I love about that question, Daniel, is, what can people do walking around their houses? I think walking around your house and just looking and inspecting and, not doing the driveway to the front door like you do every single day, and looking at the building that you don't see every day. If you see signs of water damage, bubbling paint or rotting trim or something like that, that's something to take note of and to think about fixing. You'll find a lot of little gaps and holes that can be sealed up with a caulking gun to increase efficiency, and also keep moisture out of your wall cavity and hopefully allow your building to be there for a long time. Yeah.
If people are caulking, is there any kind of, just thinking about reversibility, is there any kind of caulk or any other products like that we want to avoid?
I would, unless you really know what you're doing, I'd stay away from epoxies or any sort of, construction adhesive. But you're pretty typical, not to throw out a brand, but the Alex Plus, caulk, the painter's caulk or the Flex Seal or something like that. That's, pretty reversible and pretty easy. And again, pretty cheap way. It's maybe $10 if you throw in a caulking gun too. And you can go around and touch up any of those little holes. And that's easily reversible.
Great. We do have another question. We'll try to fit it in here and then move on to our prize giveaway. So I'll just read this one out. It's a little bit long, and Alex and Matt, if either of you have insight on it. My farmhouse was built in the 1850s. Several years ago, I poured a concrete foundation, yet the basement floor is still dirt. I have most of it covered with 6mm poly sheeting. Should I pour a concrete floor as well? What's the best insulation for basement walls? How effective is the foil bubble wrap insulation? In some places, I've attached this product to the sill and draped it down to the floor. Is it better to insulate inside or outside?
I'm going to let Matt answer the technical questions, but I always like to, sorry to pass the buck on to you, Matt, but again, if you're having a lot of moisture issues around your house, also think about where that moisture is coming from. Is it coming from the roof eave and then dumping right into a piece of ground up against your building that kind of diverts water into your basement? Regrading, simple regrading around your building is a pretty, again, easy way of, kind of diverting that bulk groundwater from entering your basement. Again, kind of simple little tools like that. Perimeter drains are a wonderful thing. Matt, if you want to speak about the specific insulation tactics.
Sure, right. The age-old question is, do you insulate inside or outside? If you insulate inside, it's easier to get at the foundation, that's for sure, because you don't have dirt and backfill piled up against it. But then you have to be very careful that you're managing the water on the outside of the building, right? So you need good drainage away, good grading and drainage away. Roof overhangs and porches are awesome at keeping water away from the foundation. If there used to be a porch and now there isn't, I mean, that's when I see a lot of damage to sills and walls and foundation walls and things like that, because they weren't meant to have, they don't have the right grading to keep the water moving away from the building. Gutters are very good at keeping water moving away from the building. They don't look good on a lot of historic buildings, but sometimes there's things you can do on the ground to move water away from the building. So think about that. If you do put insulation on the inside of your basement walls, it's critical to keep the air that's in the basement from getting between that cold foundation wall and your insulation, because it will condense there. It has humidity in that air, and that moisture that's in the air will condense on that wall and create a water problem. So airtight, if you're going to put foundation insulation right on the concrete under your building, make sure air is not getting behind it. That's a big place we see trouble. Whether or not you put a slab, if you have a good taped poly vapor barrier on the floor, that's doing the work of keeping the moisture down in the dirt where it belongs. If you pour a slab on top of it, it'll be more durable. You'll be able to walk on it and store things on it and that kind of thing. So it depends what you're doing in your basement. If you're not doing anything in your basement, it's okay to have the poly down there. If you are going to be storing things and walking around down there a bit, you might consider putting some slab down. Also, people put rolled roofing down on top of the poly, like on the path to the heating system or where they walk commonly. That works pretty well at protecting the plastic, but eventually you're gonna have to redo the plastic. I mean, it's not gonna last forever.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you both thanks, Matt, for joining in and helping with some technical answers. Alex, thanks for all your knowledge with historic buildings and the work you're doing at Preservation Trust of Vermont. I know that we've got a couple other questions that came in. We'll try our best to send you an email afterwards and get answers to you if we can. Matt did also put in a note earlier about why shutters are green. And that's because early on in the 1700s and 1800s, green paint was paint with arsenic in it, which was a preservative to keep the shutters lasting longer. So if you've got green shutters out there, that might be from some of that original attempt to keep them around. Don't chew on them. We promised at the beginning that we would be giving away a book that Alex has graciously volunteered up for anybody who stuck it out to the end with us. And thanks to all the participants who got a great number who showed up today. A lot of great interest. So thanks for being here. Let's see, what did we decide? We were going to ask people if they knew.
Oh, do you want me to add? Daniel's like, what were we getting? I like it, the finger guns. So our question is, if you were paying attention at the beginning, we showed some photos of a specific famous house in Vermont known as Plymouth Notch. So who lived in that home? Who was the owner of Plymouth Notch? And if you put the answer in the comments, we will pick from one of the correct answers the person to get we've already got it in there, to get a copy of The Gathering Place. I appreciate the spelling so far of the answer to this. We will not disqualify you for spelling. But if you've guessed it, you will be entered to win The Gathering Place by Peter Miller. Thank you to the Preservation Trust of Vermont for donating that. So,
yeah.
Wow.
And feel free to, if you're on Facebook, you can drop it in the comments there too. We'll send this out soon. Thanks again, and check out buttonupvermont.org for the next opportunity. We'll be back on Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.